Something enormous has just been uncovered in Formula One. The FIA has released new findings from the Qatar Grand Prix, and the evidence puts McLaren in more trouble than anyone expected. This new material finally clarifies how Oscar Piastri lost a race he controlled from the first lap, and the truth is more shocking than the paddock imagined. The FIA documents confirm that Piastri had the fastest car on the circuit and a rhythm that should have delivered an easy victory. Yet the same evidence shows that McLaren collapsed at the exact strategic moment where precision mattered most, turning a dominant performance into one of the biggest missed opportunities of the season. These findings expose the communication breakdown, the hesitation during the safety car, and the decision that allowed Max Verstappen to win with a slower Red Bull. The governing body has now placed McLaren under intense scrutiny as the championship reaches its final round with only one race remaining. And before we break down everything the FIA discovered, make sure you subscribe right now because what you are about to hear completely rewrites the final chapter of the 2025 season. Oscar Piastri arrived in Qatar with a level of confidence that reflected his recent form and the strength of the McLaren MCL39. His pole lap established his dominance, and when the lights went out, he delivered a start that demonstrated full control of the first phase. The rhythm he found immediately placed him in a position where he could build the race around his strengths. His laps in the low 1:24 range confirmed that the car had the stability, downforce, and tire management to dictate the Grand Prix from the front. The FIA analysis shows that Piastri's advantage over the field was rooted in how well the MCL39 handled the high-speed sections of Lusail. The aerodynamic platform remained stable across all three sectors, allowing him to push without stressing the tires. Lando Norris held a strong second place, but even he could not match the consistency Piastri produced. Verstappen's Red Bull RB21, affected by bouncing and weaker rotation, never threatened the McLaren at this stage. It was a one-sided contest built on pure pace. Everything changed in a single moment on lap 7. A collision between Pierre Gasly and Nico Hülkenberg forced the safety car onto the circuit. According to the new FIA findings, this event reshaped the entire race because it compressed the field and presented a mandatory strategic choice. The majority of the grid, including Verstappen, opted to pit immediately. This move allowed them to complete one required tire stint at minimal cost. McLaren, however, kept both Piastri and Norris on track. The FIA evidence now confirms that this was the turning point. Piastri asked his engineer for clarity, and he was told they would remain out to protect position. The governing body highlighted this moment because it created a mathematical scenario that McLaren could no longer win. The mandatory tire rules in Qatar require multiple stints. By refusing to stop under safety car conditions, McLaren forced Piastri to build a 25-second gap after the restart, something the FIA now calls physically impossible under the competitive density of modern Formula One. When the race resumed, the consequences became clear immediately. Piastri had lost tire temperature during the safety car laps and needed several corners to bring grip levels back. Verstappen, with fresh tires and no temperature drop, had a restart advantage that reversed the flow of the race. The FIA's timing overlays confirm that the delta between Piastri and Verstappen formed because of structural conditions, not because of a drop in driving performance. As the laps progressed, Piastri continued to execute with the precision of a champion. He managed his corner entries, monitored the tire wear, and tried to rebuild a margin. Yet the FIA documentation shows that no amount of pace could undo the time lost through the earlier decision. When Piastri finally pitted on lap 24, the gap had inverted entirely. Verstappen swept past the pit exit, and Piastri rejoined in second place with no route back to the front. The FIA classified this as the direct outcome of the safety car decision. The radio exchange that followed became one of the defining moments of the weekend. Piastri simply said he had no words. His engineer acknowledged the error. The findings included this communication because it demonstrated how fully the team understood the gravity of the mistake. The championship table now reflects the magnitude of that moment. Norris leads with 408 points, Verstappen sits on 396, and Piastri holds 392 with one race remaining. Oscar Piastri began the Qatar Grand Prix in a position of complete authority. The opening laps showed a driver who understood precisely where the grip was, how the MCL39 responded under load, and how to time each phase of the lap to create a natural rhythm. His medium compound tires remained stable, his car carried speed through the long corners without hesitation, and the early gap he built was the product of superior execution rather than aggressive risk. The problem did not originate in his cockpit. It emerged from a structural shift in the race itself, a shift that no driver can control once the field compresses and the tire regulations begin to dictate every strategic choice. The tire rules specific to Qatar require drivers to complete multiple mandatory stints due to the circuit's heavy lateral loads. Under normal race conditions, these rules act as predictable anchors for strategy. When the safety car appeared on lap 7, those same rules transformed into the single most important variable of the afternoon. The problem took shape because the timing of the safety car fell directly inside the ideal window for a low-cost pit stop. Red Bull understood this instantly. McLaren did not. The mandatory nature of the stints meant that missing this opportunity carried a mathematical consequence that no amount of pace could erase. Piastri remained calm as the field slowed, but the strategic picture around him had already changed. The safety car neutralized the gap he had built, reduced the tire temperature he had carefully preserved, and forced him into a situation where track position no longer offered security. The FIA findings highlight that the McLaren pit wall viewed the safety car through the lens of the current track order instead of the future requirements of the race. This is the moment the problem crystallized. Piastri needed a stop that aligned with the regulations. What he received instead was a call that placed him in direct conflict with those same regulations. Inside the cockpit he sought clarity, asking calmly about the plan. The response he received focused entirely on maintaining the lead on track. The tone was collected, yet the logic behind the instruction did not fit the strategic reality. The FIA analysis makes clear that staying out under the safety car forced Piastri to attempt an impossible task. He would need to rebuild a margin exceeding 25 seconds after the restart. The problem was now structural, not competitive. Even perfect driving could not close the gap between what the race demanded and what the strategy allowed. The restart exposed this gap immediately. Piastri still performed at a level expected of a driver fighting for a world championship, yet the tires he carried into that moment had lost their opening grip profile. Their temperature had dropped, their response became softer, and the flow he had built in the opening phase needed several corners to return. Verstappen, with new tires and a fully reset energy system, accelerated away with confidence. The problem did not stem from a loss of pace. It stemmed from the conditions created by the earlier decision. As the race progressed, the margin required for Piastri to make his mandatory stop without losing position grew further out of reach. He continued producing strong sector times and controlling degradation, but the foundation beneath him remained unchanged. The FIA data shows that the gap to Verstappen developed not because Piastri slowed but because the tire life difference created a structural imbalance. The problem evolved into something the driver could no longer influence. It rested solely with the choices the team made during the decisive moment of the race. By the time Piastri entered the pits for his required stop, the final shape of the problem had become unavoidable. He exited the pit lane behind Verstappen and understood the full weight of what had happened. His radio message captured the truth with painful clarity. He said he had no words. His engineer acknowledged the miscalculation. The FIA included this exchange in its findings because it reflected a team fully aware that the race turned on a single moment of hesitation. The problem was never one of pace. It was a matter of timing, interpretation, and awareness of the rules. And now McLaren faces the consequences of that moment with a world championship hanging in the balance. The engineering challenge at McLaren began the moment the safety car compressed the field. Before that point, the MCL39 operated in a stable aerodynamic pocket that allowed Piastri to extract consistent performance from every corner. The airflow through the floor remained undisturbed and the tires maintained the temperatures required for peak grip. When the safety car appeared, the reduced speed altered the aerodynamic balance in ways the engineers were forced to address instantly. The left front tire, which absorbs the heaviest load in Qatar, lost temperature at a rate that concerned the pit wall. This early shift set the stage for the engineering problems that followed. The engineers then confronted a difficult scenario with the hybrid deployment system. Under safety car conditions, the braking phases are irregular and shallow, which makes harvesting energy far less efficient. An aggressive harvest would help restore a full deployment profile for the restart, but it would also cool the tires even further. Preserving tire temperature would give Piastri better balance in the early corners after the restart, yet it would also leave him with weaker hybrid deployment against rivals who had already pitted. The FIA findings show that McLaren hesitated between these two approaches, and that hesitation shaped the aerodynamic and energy conditions Piastri carried into the decisive restart. During those laps, the engineers relied heavily on predictive modeling to determine the consequences of their decisions. These models incorporate tire wear projections, rejoin gaps, and scenarios that simulate the behavior of rival cars. The FIA documents reveal that the modeling made one fact unmistakable. Once Verstappen stopped under the safety car, Piastri needed a post-restart margin that exceeded what was mathematically achievable. The engineers had the data in front of them, yet debate continued on the pit wall. Formula One leaves no margin for indecision, and this delay became part of the chain of events that placed McLaren on the defensive. When the race restarted, McLaren's engineering team had to solve a new set of problems. The tire temperatures had not recovered fully, leaving Piastri with reduced front grip during the critical first corners. Verstappen, with new tires, never faced this issue. The FIA time overlays confirmed that Piastri's car regained its rhythm only after several sectors, by which point Verstappen had already closed the practical window. The engineers monitored the deltas in real time, and despite Piastri's strong laps, the advantage he had built earlier no longer existed in a form the strategy could exploit. With their options narrowing, McLaren attempted to stabilize the handling characteristics of the car. They issued instructions related to brake migration adjustments to help control entry stability. They refined differential settings to ensure rotational balance through the medium-speed corners. They advised on lift and coast phases to manage tire temperature and reduce surface stress. The FIA findings show that these adjustments were precise and technically correct. However, they were measures designed to preserve second place, not mechanisms capable of recovering a lost victory. Approaching the mandatory stop, the engineers evaluated every possible pit window. They analyzed the pace of midfield drivers, calculated rejoin gaps, and assessed the probability of emerging behind traffic that could compromise Piastri's ability to heat the tires immediately. The projections consistently revealed that even the optimal stop would place Piastri behind Verstappen. The FIA flagged this as a confirmation that the decisive error had occurred long before the pit entry line. The engineering tools remained strong, but the earlier strategic choice had shaped a race scenario with no positive solution.